Hello, I'm Danny Smith with the North Carolina Rural Water Association, and we're at the new North Carolina Rural Water Association training facility. We're going to be testing the RP backflow preventer today. We're going to be using our Midwest 845 5-valve test kit to do this. First thing we want to do is we want to notify the customer that we're going to be shutting off the water. Then we want to inspect our area and make sure that there's no hazards around. And because we're doing a relief valve on an RP, you may want to take like a little mirror or something, look up in that relief valve and make sure that there's no spiders or anything up in there. I've already got my information filled out on my test sheet, and so we're ready to test the backflow preventer. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flush out our test cocks. We're going to open the number 4 first so that we get water flowing through the assembly so we do not activate the relief valve. We want to know what that exact status that relief valve is. We're going to open our number 1, number 2, number 3. Then we're going to close our number 1, close number 2, close number 3, close number 4. All right, so we're going to hook our high side hose to test cock 2. We want to make sure that our filters are towards the backflow preventer. So we're going to hook it up to number 2. We're going to hook our low side hose up to test cock number 3. Then we're going to open our we need to check our gauge, make sure everything's closed off. We want to open our low side first. Open our test cock number 3, and then use our low bleed and get the air bleeding off of the kit and the lines. Then we're going to open our high side. Open the number 2 test cock. We're going to open our high bleed. Okay, then we're going to close our high bleed first, let our gauge peg over, then close our low side, and let our gauge settle. We're looking for a value of 5 psi or greater. We're at 9, so we're good to go. All right, so we're going to close our number 2 shutoff valve. I'm going to get my line pressure reading. We're at about 52 psi here. Put this on our sheet. All right, so the first actual test that we're doing is we want to test the relief valve opening point. So we're going to open our high control valve 2 full turns. Then we're going to open our low control, no more than 1/4 of a turn. Just get the gauge dropping. Put your hand up underneath the backflow preventer and watch our gauge. And our relief valve opening point is about 3.4. Close your low side control there. So our relief valve opening point is 3.4. All right, now we want to test the status of the number 2 check valve against back pressure. So we're going to use our bypass hose. We want to open our bypass valve just a little bit, get a little bit of water running through it so we can do a wet connection. Close that bypass valve back off. Now we're going to open our number 4 test cock. Now we want to reestablish pressure on the gauge. We will do this prior to each test. So open up your low bleed valve. Let it bleed off the air a second, and we'll close the bleed valve. Notice we're back down to about the 9 psi area. All right, using the bypass hose, we're going to take high pressure water going through the red hose and run it through our bypass hose and put back pressure on our number 2 check valve. All right, so we want to crack open 2 full turns our bypass valve. Watch our gauge. Our gauge should stay about the same. May drop a little bit. That's okay. You could have disc compression. The only thing we don't want to do is it shouldn't drop to the relief valve opening point. If it drops to the relief valve opening point, then you've got a problem with number 2. Ours is holding steady, so we're good. All right, now we want to also check the status of the number 2 shutoff valve because we're testing this backflow preventer in a no-flow situation. And we want to make sure that it's not leaking to the customer or if we've got pressure from the customer coming back to us. So by doing that, we're going to close the number 2 test cock. Watch our gauge, make sure it doesn't drop or rise. It's holding steady, so that tells us that the number 2 shutoff valve is held tight. So we can say that our number 2 check valve is held tight, and we can also say that our number 2 shutoff valve is closed tight. All right, so our next test is to check the number 1 check valve. So what we want to do is we want to close our bypass. Open our number 2 test cock. And then all we're going to do is reestablish pressure on the gauge. Let our gauge settle. And we're at about 9 psi, which again, it should be greater than 5, so we're good. So now we've got our number 1 check valve and we've got our relief valve, so we can get what our buffer is. So we're at 5.6 for our buffer. Buffer should be 3 psi or greater. We're good. All right, so we've completed all that. Now we want to check the status of our number 2 check valve. So at this point, we can close all of our test cocks. I'm going to open up these valves just to kind of bleed that pressure off of those so that when I take them loose, they're not spraying on me. Close them back up. Now we can remove the bypass hose. We no longer need it. We're going to take our low side hose and move it down to test cock 4. Move our high side hose down to test cock 3. All right, and just like we done at the beginning, we're going to open up our low side, get it bleeding off. Going to open up our high side, get it bleeding, bleed all the air. And again, we're going to close the high side first. Let our gauge go as far as it'll go. It will not peg out now because we're downstream of the number 1 check valve. Close your low side bleed. And our gauge should be at least 1 psi or greater on the number 1 check. We're at about 1.8 here. So we're going to mark that on our sheet. All right, so our backflow preventer has tested out good. So we're going to remove all of our equipment. And the last thing we want to do is make sure that we've reestablished the water going to the customer. Open your number 2 slowly so you're not hammering the customer's water system. And we've successfully completed the test on the RP backflow preventer.